Hey, I'm YogiDonaldo, your octogenarian yogi.
In these videos, I'll share what I've learned over the years about yoga's ethics, its philosophy, its poses, its breath work, and meditation. May we be protected together, may we be nourished together, may we create strength together, may our work together bring fulfillment, and may there be no disharmonies among us. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace. I've been in Delhi for about a week. Jet lag is pretty much over. I've gotten a little bit accustomed to being in India again, and it's time to begin planning the rest of my trip. For starters, I want to fly down to Chennai on the southeast coast, used to be known as Madras. I'll spend a little time there, then go down to Pondicherry, which is just south of Chennai. It was a former French colony. I'm curious to see a temple in the city of Madurai. I'll go there, then take the train across to Cochin on the opposite coast. So I fly from Delhi to Chennai. In Chennai, I check into the New Woodland Hotel, then take a walk around the neighborhood just to check out things, see where we are. I need to get a phone, so somebody directs me to the big mall and a Nokia kiosk in the middle of the mall. Getting the phone turned out to be an adventure in itself. I had to get a photo to go with my application for the phone, which then gets turned into a government agency. India's had problems with terrorists, and so I can understand their concern about the phones. Stroll around the neighborhood, walk toward the Bay of Bengal, which is not too far away from the hotel where I'm staying. There's a monument to Gandhi and his walk across India. It's kind of a dull, stormy day today, and apparently not many of the little fishermen are out with their boats, sort of hunkered down, some hunkered down doing other things. Also nearby is the St. Thomas Cathedral. It was built in the 16th century by Portuguese explorers over the site of the tomb of St. Thomas the Apostle. When St. Thomas came to India, he landed on the other coast near Cochin and came across the country to the Chennai, what's today Chennai, and was eventually martyred nearby here. At the cathedral, there's a statue to Our Lady of Mylapore. Mylapore is actually the community where this cathedral is located. The statue is carved out of wood. It's about 3 feet high. It's also interesting that St. Francis Xavier, who was here and is supposed to have prayed at the statue in 1545. There's a sign that points me to a reliquary and museum behind the church. And I take a walk around there, and when I come into the lobby of this museum / reliquary, to my left there's a life-size statue of Santa Claus. And interestingly, Santa Claus is wearing glasses. They don't show up too well in this photograph. I have no idea how Santa Claus and St. Thomas got connected here. But that's India. There's always a surprise. When I go into the reliquary, it's a small little museum. The central display is a spear point that killed St. Thomas, and there's also a little bone fragment in there. I managed to snap this picture just before the guard told me that I wasn't supposed to have the camera. St. Thomas Mount is out by the airport. It's where the apostle hid out before he was discovered and speared to death. Today it's a national shrine. There's also a good view of the city from the mount. As I walked around, I discovered a small cemetery. A number of nuns were buried there, surprisingly in their 80s and 90s when they died. I'm not exactly sure how these elephants or these statues of elephants fit into the whole picture, but I've noticed in some of the temples in India they do have live elephants. India can be very tolerant of other religions. On the drive back from St. Thomas Mount to my hotel, I passed a sign that advertised for the World Atheist Conference. Chennai is also the home of the Theosophical Society. J. Krishnamurti was a member of that society until he broke with it. And then there's the interesting juxtaposition of Santa Claus and St. Thomas back at the cathedral. And I passed a mural of Jesus and Ganesh. Some friends are staying at the New Woodland. We crossed the street together to have a dosa. I'm astounded when the dosa comes. When I was here before, they were about the size of a burrito. Later we went over to a temple in Mylapore, and as luck would have it, turned out that they were having a Bharatanatyam dance at the temple that night. Classical Indian dance is a real favorite of mine. I really enjoy it. Another time on my own, I enjoy a classical Katha Kali dance. In this performance, the dancers are performing a part of the Ramayana, the adventures of Ram and his attendants, and the capture of his lovely wife Sita and how they managed to get her back. I spend an afternoon at the museum. There are rooms and rooms of bronzes and stone carvings of gods and goddesses. No surprise there. I'm interested to see that Parvati, Shiva's consort, is also depicted in a ring of fire. I had not seen that before. I'm really fond of Shiva Nataraj, Shiva dancing. If you remember, Shiva is the destroyer of everything. But over time, I think that the symbols of the other gods, beginning, middle, and end, all get sort of amalgamated into his personality, his persona. So he's depicted as dancing the world in and out of existence, creation, sustaining, and destruction. One with a drum that made the first sound of creation. One with a flame, symbolic of the flame that will destroy the universe. And hand held in the fear not gesture. Another points to his raised foot, signifying the refuge for the troubled soul. He's pictured here dancing on a personification of illusion, illusion that leads us astray in a spiritual sense. Shiva's hair flies in all directions as it absorbs the goddess Ganga's fury to protect mankind. Shiva dances in the cosmic circle of fire that is a continuous creation and destruction of the universe, the pulsation of space and time. I find the symbolism fantastically amazing. There are several school tours that are going through the museum. Then I come across a room that has a display of the Magna Carta. I'm sort of surprised to see that here, and when I stop and think about it, I shouldn't be surprised since both India and the United States share a connection through English law. I hired a car and driver at the hotel to take me to Pondicherry. Pondicherry is about 100 miles south along the coast. We leave Chennai, drive through some countryside. Arriving in Pondicherry, notice a little French flavor. My hotel's on a busy street in the old part of town. It's pleasant, streets are tree-lined for the most part, and it's a short walk to the Bay of Bengal and the beach. Being a former French colony, Catholic Church is fairly strong here. I find it interesting that it's 2 weeks into January and they still have the Christmas nativity scene up. In January, it's warm here in Pondicherry. Strolling along the tree-lined streets is really nice. I really enjoy it. It's a pretty little town. And there are some curious signs to be seen here. This is an interesting scene. It seems that when a business wants to have a meeting with all the employees, they sit them outside, line them all up. I've seen this before. There's a small Hindu temple in town. Streets are narrow and sometimes it's difficult to pass. Sometimes it's difficult for even one vehicle to get down the street. Just outside of Pondicherry is a utopian community called Auroville. It was founded in the late 1960s, early 1970s by a follower of Sri Aurobindo, a local saint and someone who's really well looked up to. They have a meditation center there. They call it the concentration chamber, but I'm interested to go to see that, and because it's not a long drive, I get a tuk-tuk and go out to see it. It ends up to be a more complicated procedure than just going there. You have to go get a ticket, supposed to go into town, call them, make an appointment, come back 3 days later, go through the place. Somehow I got lucky and was able to make the appointment while I was there. Also had to have an interview. That was interesting. I don't know why anyway, well, this is India. They do what they do. My favorite restaurant in Pondicherry turns out to be a place called Baker Street. Their logo is of Sherlock Holmes, a silhouette of Sherlock Holmes. They advertise French delicacies. They have clean salads, great pastries, and a nice variety too. There's some other good places, but this ends up being my favorite. One night on my walks, I discovered a marriage hall. I've heard about how big and fancy some of these Indian weddings are, and it's kind of interesting to see this in real life. Huge posters, life-size, bigger than life-size images of the happy couple. It's interesting to see some of the religious statuary that's displayed here in Pondicherry. It's not surprising to see the Virgin Mary adorning the high school, but the eye doctor's shrine is a surprise. But again, this is India. Nothing should surprise us. And like people in so many places around the world, Sunday's a day to get out and enjoy yourself. And they do that here too. Families out for a Sunday stroll along the quay wall. And on a nice calm day, there are fishermen out on the Bay of Bengal. My hotel was supposed to have internet, but they don't. They were also supposed to have a restaurant, but they don't. But it turns out they have a good internet cafe not too far away, and for a reasonable amount of money you can use their machines, and they have decent connectivity. While I was in Pondicherry, I got really sick. Fever, chills, night sweats. It was pretty awful. I ended up having to go to the doctor, and that whole experience was kind of interesting. The visit to the doctor, tests, and prescriptions ended up costing me about $16. After I got better, I took a tuk-tuk back out to Auroville to the concentration chamber, and that was an interesting experience too. We were guided on a long walk out to the Matrimandir, the concentration chamber. Went inside, took off our shoes, rolled up our pant legs so we wouldn't bring dirt from the outside in, and then walked up a spiral staircase that went around the inside of the building, which was all kind of open, but anyway, it spiraled around the inside up to what would be equivalent to the equator plane, where there was a floor. That was where the meditation chamber was. In the center of this large room was a big crystal, from the hole in the center right above it, or maybe it was a light that was directed down on this big crystal. Light shone down onto the crystal, and it just seemed to glow. Around the outside were 12 pillars that went all the way up to the ceiling. And we were given 15 minutes to do our meditation or concentration, and then we're guided back out. Another day I hired a car to drive me out to Tiruvannamalai, a town about an hour's drive to the west of Pondicherry. I wanted to see the ashram there where Ramana Maharshi had lived. He was a local Tamil saint. Tamil Nadu is the name of the state that this is in. Tamil is the name of the language that's spoken around here. Ramana Maharshi sort of lived a life that was different from the average teenager. At about age 18, he became spontaneously enlightened. He went to his temple in Tiruvannamalai, and then later he moved into caves in the mountain around Mount Aranauchala, and lived in his cave for a long time before he finally began living in the temple. Anyway, I was interested to see the temple and see the mountain where he lived. It's also one of the things that people do is to walk around the mountain. It's a 7-mile trek around the mountain, but I was still feeling a little queasy from being sick, and so I just let my car driver drive me around the mountain. At last I decided it was time to head on from Pondicherry and head toward Madurai. And I thought I would do an interim stop at Tanjavur. I had sent ahead an email to make a reservation at a hotel there. And so I set off from Pondicherry, hired a car to drive me there. It was about a 2-hour drive. On the drive, the driver suggested a stop to see a temple at Chidambaram. While I was walking around the temple grounds, I met a man who said he came there every year for the last 15 years. He told me that they had just recently repainted the temple, and they do that, he said, every 15 years. It's a rather beautiful temple, a lot of interesting work. It's a Shiva temple. Images of Parvati, Shiva's consort, and Shiva Nataraj. We saw that back at the museum in Chennai. And after we left there, he insisted that we needed to stop at Kumbakonum. And I'm thinking, if we stop at every temple along the way, we're never going to get to Tanjavur. But anyway, it ended up being a worthwhile stop. Again, another Shiva temple. This one had an interesting courtyard, that's a very large courtyard, as I remember. But one particular building was laid out sort of as a replica of a chariot, and on the corners were these interesting carvings of a chariot with the wheels. We finally did get to Tanjavur, and a big surprise awaited me there. As I checked into the hotel, informed that no, I didn't have a reservation, that they hadn't gotten the email. They could put me up for that night, but the next day was Constitution Day, a national holiday, and so, oops, sorry, everything is booked up for the next week or so. And yeah, you're probably not going to be able to get a place in Trichi either, or Madurai, because it's Constitution Day there too, and they'll be full. So I had to begin to rethink my whole plan. What I decided was that I would spend the night here in Tanjavur and then get a driver to take me to the airport in Trichi, where I'd catch a flight back to Delhi and regroup, replan things. So I spent the afternoon, or what was left of the day, walking around town, and that night I went to the temple, which was just like across the street, which was kind of an interesting experience to see the place at night. Because so many lights were on, it attracted insects, which attracted bats. So there were a lot of bats flying around. Tried to get some pictures of them, but they were Too fast, I guess. This is an interesting sculpture of the goddess triumphant over spiritual ignorance. And so I got my car the next morning and headed to Trichi. Trichi and the airport, where I was met with another surprise. Pulled up to the airport, planning to spend the day there until my flight out later that evening, to discover that, oops, they closed the airport when there aren't any flights going in or out, and they weren't going to reopen it until probably about 8 o'clock that evening. So one of the security guards suggested that maybe I could get a taxi driver to drive me around town, see the sights, and come back in time for the flight, which is what I ended up doing. So the first stop with my taxi tour guide was to Our Lady of Lourdes Church in Trichi. Beautiful building, large, open, colorfully painted, well taken care of. For lunch that day, my driver took me to a workman's restaurant where we ate off of a banana leaf. Then it was across the river to the Ranganath temple, a Vishnu temple, very large. It's like a city within a city. In fact, it was so big that the driver went around to the back of it and in through a gate there that they had for vehicles and parked inside the temple grounds. I think this is an image of Krishna playing his flute. Krishna is another version of Vishnu. It really is a beautiful temple, and one that you could spend a lot of time looking at the sculptures and the images around. From here, we recrossed the river to the rock temple. There's a rock mountain in the middle of the city, and at the base of it is a temple, but there's also stairs that lead up to an upper temple. But there's a beautiful view of the city from up there, and you can look back across the river at the Ranganath temple. I had an interesting experience as I was getting ready to come down from the upper temple. There were goats walking around on the railing, but that wasn't the most interesting thing that happened up there. I stopped just to take a little rest at the top step, and I was realizing that there were these three teenagers, and they'd split up. Two of them went down the stairs ahead of me, and one of them lagged behind. And out of the corner of my eye, I thought I could see that he was positioning himself behind me, and then I noticed that the boys down the steps turned around with a camera and snapped a picture. This is something that a lot of them do in India. They like to have their photos taken with Westerners. Anyway, I reached around and took this boy from behind, positioned him around alongside of me so his friends could get a better picture. They got their picture. He seemed kind of embarrassed and walked down to rejoin his buddies, and I could tell what they were saying to him, even though I couldn't understand the language, but they were saying, "You didn't thank him." And anyway, he turned around and gave me this nod of thanks, and then they all went on down the steps. It was kind of cute, I thought. As I went on down the steps, at the bottom of the steps in the main part of the temple, they had an elephant that people stopped to get their pictures taken with. I'm sure they paid a little price for it, but anyway, again, this is India. By now it was beginning to get late, and my taxi tour guide suggested that he take me to a temple called Ayyappan Temple. He said it was a small temple, and they feed people there free. It's a modern place, no fancy towers. A sign over the entrance says, "Religion unites, not divides." We separate. I walk around the small courtyard with all sorts of welcoming signs telling me I expect to pass through this world but once. Any good, therefore, I can do, or any kindness that I can show to any fellow creatures, let me do it now, for I shall not pass this way again. So apparently these people at this temple are not into reincarnation, which sort of surprises me. We had our dinner of basically rice and lentils, substantial but nothing fancy. Afterwards, I thought I'd meditate for a few minutes on the meditation platform until I was interrupted by my taxi tour driver, and he wanted to show me what was happening. It was getting close to sunset, and the temple attendees were getting ready to put the temple god to bed. They changed the clothes on the statue, and then in a procession carried it away for the night. We got out to the airport. I caught my plane back to Delhi, and that was quite an adventure there. Things happened that I wasn't expecting, and they ended up turning out pretty well. May our bodies be strong, relaxed, and healthy. May our minds be calm, clear, and serene. May our hearts be filled with loving kindness, and may we live our lives in harmony with our true inner selves. May we be friendly toward the joyful, compassionate toward the suffering. May we celebrate the good in others and remain impartial to their faults and imperfections. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace. Hands in prayer at our hearts. We bow to each other. Namaste. Thank you for being with me. I hope you'll subscribe and share these videos.